The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, upon its initial deployment to England in early 1943, presented an undeniably formidable profile on paper. This colossal aircraft was armed with a formidable array of 850 caliber machine guns, possessed an extraordinary resilience, capable of enduring battle damage that would utterly devastate lesser aerial combatants, and was propelled by a supercharged engine generating in excess of 2,000 horsepower. Aviators from the United States, upon first settling into the capacious cockpits of these colossal machines, experienced an overwhelming sense of invulnerability. However, they were on the precipice of a harsh awakening, a strategic miscalculation that almost eradicated the entire fighter escort capacity of the 8th Air Force. The inaugural combat deployment for the 56th Fighter Group commenced on April 15, 1943, targeting objectives over the skies of occupied Europe. Barely 20 minutes after penetrating the airspace above the Dutch coastline, they were confronted by formations of Focke-Wulf FW-190s. The ensuing engagement profoundly disconcerted all participants and observers. The German interceptors executed maneuvers that allowed them to dramatically outturn the P-47s, making the American aircraft appear almost stationary in the sky. American aviators instinctively pulled hard on their control columns, attempting to mirror their adversaries' movements and engage in the traditional turning dogfights, a venerable tactic employed by fighter pilots since the Great War. Regrettably, the Thunderbolts lumbered through the atmosphere, shedding precious airspeed with each cumbersome turn. The skilled pilots of the Luftwaffe exploited this disadvantage, systematically dismantling the American formation. By the end of this harrowing encounter, 4 P-47s had been lost, tragically failing to achieve a single confirmed aerial victory. The root of the issue did not lie in any deficiency of pilot aptitude or valor. These American airmen possessed rigorous training, a comprehensive grasp of aerial combat principles, and an ardent desire to demonstrate the capabilities of their new aircraft. Their fundamental error, however, was in operating the P-47 as if it were a Supermarine Spitfire or a Messerschmitt Bf-109, types of agile interceptors whose effectiveness was predicated on superior maneuverability. The Thunderbolt, by design, had an unladen weight of 12,500 pounds. When fully provisioned with fuel and combat ordnance, its operational mass surged beyond 17,500 pounds. This made it approximately 3 tons heavier than an FW-190 and nearly 4 tons more substantial than a Bf-109, a critical disparity. In the cold, impartial realm of physics, raw courage offers no advantage against immutable laws. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. Throughout the months of April and May 1943, the attrition rate for American forces steadily escalated. American fighter pilots, upon identifying enemy German formations, would frequently commit to turning engagements, only to either be shot down themselves or observe with profound frustration as their agile adversaries effortlessly outmaneuvered them and disengaged. While the P-47 exhibited a respectable roll rate, its turning radius was woefully inadequate when juxtaposed with that of its principal adversaries. Aviators vividly described their sensation of piloting cumbersome trucks, contrasting sharply with the nimble sports cars seemingly flown by their German counterparts. Consequently, the collective morale of the fighter groups plummeted dramatically. A significant number of airmen began to openly voice doubts, questioning whether the Thunderbolt represented a catastrophic error in aircraft procurement, a fundamentally flawed design destined to result in their demise. Statistical data unequivocally corroborated their growing apprehensions. Throughout the spring of 1943, P-47 units were registering approximately one aerial victory for every 2 aircraft lost, an utterly unsustainable and catastrophic exchange ratio. Operational reports compiled by German pilots during this critical juncture underscored their burgeoning confidence. Seasoned Luftwaffe veterans characterized these initial engagements with the P-47 as straightforward victories, attributing this ease to the American pilots' persistent reliance on horizontal turning maneuvers, a realm where the Thunderbolt's substantial mass proved a severe impediment. A particular FW-190 pilot recorded in his personal journal that engaging Thunderbolts in combat was less challenging than routine training sorties, given the predictable nature of the American pilot's tactics, an invariable attempt to turn and pursue. On the ground at their English airfields, even the maintenance crews observed the grim consequences. P-47s frequently returned bearing damage indicative of stern attacks, incontrovertible proof that German fighters were able to maintain advantageous positions directly astern, while American pilots futilely attempted evasive maneuvers. While the aircraft's commendable durability ensured a higher survival rate for its pilots, allowing them to recount their frustrating experiences, mere survival without achieving tactical success was rapidly eroding unit efficacy. A fundamental shift was imperative, and with utmost urgency. The 8th Air Force could not sustain many more months of operating fighter groups demonstrably incapable of effectively engaging the enemy. The courageous bomber crews venturing deep into German airspace required escort fighters capable not merely of accompanying them, but of decisively neutralizing harassing Luftwaffe interceptors, each mission returning with accounts of P-47s being outmaneuvered, represented another instance where German fighter aircraft were granted unchecked liberty to inflict devastating losses upon B-17s and B-24s. The burden placed upon fighter group commanders to rectify this critical tactical dilemma was monumental. The eventual resolution, once discovered, fundamentally reoriented every preconceived notion regarding aerial warfare. This crucial breakthrough originated from an unanticipated source, not from official tactical doctrines or high-level headquarters directives, but rather from the observations of individual pilots who began to analyze the outcomes when they abandoned the conventional practice of engaging in turning fights with enemy aircraft. Lieutenant Quint Brown, serving with the 78th Fighter Group, made a peculiar observation during a mission conducted over the Zuiderzee in June 1943. Following an unsuccessful turning dogfight against Bf-109s, he made the instinctive decision to push the nose of his aircraft downwards, initiating a dive to disengage. His airspeed dramatically accelerated, far exceeding that of the pursuing Messerschmitts attempting to keep pace. He successfully recovered from the dive several thousand feet beneath his original altitude, remarkably still intact and unharmed. This singular incident prompted a profound re-evaluation in his approach to his formidable 7-ton fighter. The substantial mass of the P-47, it became apparent, was not solely a detrimental characteristic. From a purely physical perspective, such a colossal airframe possessed a distinct capacity for storing kinetic energy compared to its more lightweight counterparts. Specifically during a dive, the Thunderbolt masterfully transformed its potential energy, derived from altitude, into kinetic energy, manifested as speed, with exceptionally potent efficiency. The very 7,500-pound bulk that rendered horizontal turning so ponderous now conferred an enormous benefit in vertical plane maneuvers. This aircraft could accelerate downwards at a rate superior to any fighter operated by the Luftwaffe. The maximum achievable speed for a P-47 in a controlled dive surpassed 550 miles per hour. In contrast, FW-190s and BF-109s typically began to exhibit control surface flutter and significant structural strain at speeds above 470 miles per hour. This represented far more than a minor tactical advantage. It was a foundational physical superiority that effectively nullified every single turning handicap previously experienced by the Thunderbolt. While numerous pilots independently ascertained their capacity to outdistance German adversaries during diving maneuvers, translating this crucial observation into a coherent offensive tactical doctrine proved to be a protracted process. The established paradigm of aerial dogfighting was profoundly entrenched within their operational philosophy. Historically, fighter engagements had been synonymous with intricate turning, incessant circling, and the persistent endeavor to gain and maintain a positional advantage directly behind an opponent. The act of disengaging via a dive was instinctively perceived as an act of retreat, even cowardice. It demanded a particularly astute and analytical intellect to grasp that sheer velocity could, in itself, be deployed as a weapon, that remaining embroiled in a conventional turning engagement was unnecessary if one possessed the ability to dictate the parameters of combat through superior vertical maneuvering. While the principles of energy tactics were not entirely novel, with some seasoned aviators already comprehending the concept of exchanging altitude for increased speed, the systematic application of this approach to heavy fighter aircraft as a foundational operational doctrine was nothing short of revolutionary. The P-47 Thunderbolt's formidable Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine was engineered to deliver its peak performance at significant altitudes, specifically within the atmospheric band of approximately 25,000 to 30,000 feet. From this commanding elevation, a Thunderbolt pilot could initiate a precipitous dive onto enemy formations, rapidly accumulating an immense velocity. This enabled them to execute swift, devastating slashing attacks, subsequently converting that tremendous kinetic energy into a powerful zoom climb to effortlessly regain their advantageous altitude. German aircraft, in stark contrast, proved largely incapable of effectively replicating these maneuvers. Their own engines suffered from a marked power degradation at higher altitudes, and their comparatively lighter airframes were structurally ill-equipped to withstand or match the P-47's blistering dive acceleration. Despite compelling evidence from initial flight tests conducted within the continental United States, which meticulously detailed the P-47's exceptional diving prowess, these crucial findings remained largely unheeded, relegated to obscurity, as the prevailing strategic focus within the Army Air Force AAF in 1942 was overwhelmingly fixated on an aircraft's turning capabilities. The established fighter doctrine of the era unequivocally championed maneuverability as the paramount attribute for aerial combat. While the fundamental design parameters for the P-47 deliberately incorporated robust armament and enhanced structural resilience, specifically tailored for its primary role as a bomber escort, the presumed tactical engagement scenarios stubbornly adhered to conventional dogfighting paradigms. Remarkably, no high-ranking officer or strategic planner had genuinely contemplated the revolutionary notion that a fighter aircraft could achieve decisive victory by completely eschewing traditional turning engagements. As the conflict progressed into the middle of 1943, a discernible pattern began to emerge from the candid, unofficial exchanges among seasoned P-47 pilots. A consistent observation was made regarding those who consistently returned from multiple sorties unscathed and successful. These were the individuals who, whether through deliberate strategy or fortunate happenstance, had instinctively shied away from protracted, circuitous aerial duels. Instead, their operational methodology involved ascending to considerable heights, executing rapid, high-speed descents for swift, incisive strikes, and then leveraging their acquired momentum to quickly disengage and regain elevation. They intrinsically understood the strategic value of altitude, metaphorically treating it as a precious financial reserve, expending it judiciously to gain velocity for an attack, only to reinvest that newfound speed immediately back into altitude through powerful zoom climbs. Conversely, their counterparts, who persistently attempted to engage in close quarters, turning dogfights, faced grim outcomes, frequently succumbing to enemy fire, or returning from missions without any confirmed victories. We sincerely invite you to stay with us and watch the conclusion of this insightful video. Your appreciation through a like and a subscription to our channel would be immensely valued. Please also take a moment to share in the comments section where you are tuning in from and your thoughts on the compelling topic discussed in this presentation. The substantial mass of the P-47, which admittedly rendered it comparatively ponderous and less agile in tight turning maneuvers, akin to a robust ground vehicle, simultaneously endowed it with exceptional resilience. This inherent heft allowed it to slice through atmospheric turbulence with unwavering stability, a phenomenon that would severely buffet and destabilize lighter, more delicate aircraft. Indeed, its formidable 7-ton weight became a crucial asset, imparting remarkable stability during its terrifyingly fast vertical descents. This characteristic enabled pilots to maintain an unswerving gunsight alignment on their intended targets, even as they plunged earthward at velocities that would force enemy German aviators into a desperate struggle with their aircraft's controls, merely to avert catastrophic structural disintegration. The very same airframe that often felt lethargic and unresponsive during horizontal turns transformed into an astonishingly precise and steadfast firing platform when executing a dive. Grasping this nuanced dichotomy, discerning precisely when the aircraft's considerable weight conferred an advantage and when it represented a limitation, proved to be the pivotal insight separating those aviators destined to fundamentally reshape fighter combat strategies from those who continued to grapple ineffectively with obsolete methodologies. In August of 1943, Colonel Hubert Zemke assumed leadership of the distinguished 56th Fighter Group, bringing with him a formidable reputation for an analytical acumen so profound it bordered on an almost obsessive dedication to logical inquiry. Zemke possessed no inclination for the pursuit of personal accolades or the romanticized, often idealized perceptions of aerial dogfights. Instead, his approach was rigorously pragmatic. He meticulously scrutinized every loss report with the dispassionate intensity of a financial auditor poring over a portfolio of failing investments, and the stark reality revealed within these documents deeply troubled him. his unit was experiencing an unsustainable attrition rate of highly skilled and experienced pilots, all while their operational kill ratios remained disappointingly unremarkable. The raw data presented a narrative that directly challenged and starkly contradicted every tenet of fighter tactics propagated by the Army Air Force, leading Zemke to an unwavering conviction: the unequivocal language of statistics offered an unfiltered truth. His initial strategic maneuver involved a comprehensive debriefing process, personally engaging with every pilot who had endured and returned from direct engagements with the formidable Luftwaffe. Crucially, these were not perfunctory examinations of formalized, often euphemistic, after-action reports. Rather, they were candid, unvarnished dialogues designed to elicit the raw, unembellished truths of actual combat experiences. The consistent pattern swiftly crystallized. Aviators who judiciously gained significant altitude prior to initiating an engagement and subsequently launched their attacks via steep, high-speed dives consistently demonstrated superior rates of survival and achieved a greater number of aerial victories. Conversely, those who found themselves ensnared in protracted, horizontal turning dogfights invariably met with tragic ends or returned to base without having secured any confirmed aerial kills. Armed with this critical intelligence, Zemke convened with his operations officer, making an audacious decision that, had it not yielded success, would undoubtedly have resulted in severe military disciplinary action, potentially a court-martial. He summarily discarded the conventional fighter tactics manual, effectively rewriting the rule book for aerial combat. The newly established doctrine was deceptively straightforward, yet profoundly revolutionary. Under no circumstances were pilots to engage the adversary in a turning fight. Instead, the 56th Fighter Group was mandated to ascend to an elevation of 30,000 feet before venturing into any combat zone, meticulously positioning themselves above German aerial formations. Their attacks would then be executed as devastatingly fast, high-speed dives. During these descents, pilots were instructed to unleash their firepower, tearing through the enemy formations with overwhelming force, then leveraging their immense velocity to execute rapid zoom climbs back to their advantageous altitude, ready to repeat the devastating maneuver. Should an enemy German fighter attempt to pursue them skyward, the P-47's inherent supremacy in high-altitude performance would allow the Thunderbolts to effortlessly extend their lead. Conversely, if German aircraft dared to follow them into a dive, the P-47's unmatched descent speed would rapidly create an insurmountable distance. The German pilots were thus presented with an agonizing dilemma, their only recourse being to observe in impotent frustration as American fighters relentlessly carved through their ranks. Predictably, Zemke's radical new directives encountered immediate and significant resistance from within the ranks of his own pilots. Lieutenant Colonel David Schilling, a prominent squadron commander, voiced strong opposition, asserting that such a hit-and-run methodology was tantamount to cowardice. He contended that true fighter aces engaged in sustained, close-quarters combat, rather than executing swift, predatory strikes like common brigands. Zemke's resolute rejoinder, a statement that would soon attain legendary status within the 56th Fighter Group, cut through the romanticized notions: dead heroes don't win wars, live pilots who kill the enemy do. He unequivocally communicated that any pilot who chose to disregard this new, critical doctrine and persisted in engaging in traditional turning dogfights would be subject to stern disciplinary measures. For Zemke, the imperative of survival and the quantifiable achievement of victory far outweighed any antiquated, chivalrous ideals of aerial combat. The inaugural combat mission, employing Zemke's revolutionary tactical framework, was launched on October 8, 1943, with the strategic objective of targeting Bremen. The 56th Fighter Group meticulously ascended to a towering altitude of 32,000 feet, patiently awaiting the unfolding engagement. As Luftwaffe interceptors began their ascent to challenge the Allied bomber stream, Zemke personally spearheaded his group in a perfectly coordinated, devastating dive. Their P-47s achieved a staggering velocity of 450 miles per hour, even before making contact with the German formation. The Thunderbolts then tore through the ranks of the Bf-109s with an almost unbelievable force, akin to heavy artillery shells obliterating fragile targets. The German pilots were instantly thrown into disarray, their meticulously maintained formation cohesion shattered in a single, brutal pass. The American aviators promptly executed their zoom climbs, re-established their formation at their advantageous altitude, and initiated a second devastating dive approximately 15 minutes later. By the end of this pivotal day, the 56th Fighter Group proudly reported 8 confirmed aerial victories, remarkably, without incurring a single loss. The statistical narrative had, at long last, decisively shifted in favor of the American forces. News of this unprecedented success disseminated with remarkable speed throughout the squadron. Those within the group who had previously harbored doubts and skepticism regarding the unconventional approach were instantaneously converted into fervent adherents upon surviving their initial dive attack mission unscathed. The psychological ramifications were profound and immediate. For the first time since their deployment to the European theater, American pilots experienced an empowering sensation of absolute control over the aerial engagements. They were no longer relegated to merely reacting defensively to German maneuvers. Instead, they were dictating the terms of engagement, compelling the German adversaries to respond to their aggressive tactics. This fundamental reorientation of initiative proved to be an immeasurable boon for both troop morale and overall operational effectiveness. Throughout the months of October and November, Zemke meticulously honed and further formalized this emergent doctrine. He instituted stringent altitude prerequisites, notably stipulating that engagements were, whenever feasible, never to be initiated below 25,000 feet. Furthermore, he devised explicit communication protocols, enabling individual flights to precisely coordinate their devastating dives, thereby striking enemy formations concurrently from multiple converging vectors. A critical emphasis was also placed on rigorous fire discipline. Pilots were instructed to deliver one focused, potent burst of gunfire during each high-speed diving pass, typically allowing for a mere 3 seconds of trigger activation. The indiscriminate spray and pray approach was unequivocally deemed ineffective at velocities approaching 450 mph. Instead, the directive was clear: aim with precision, unleash a controlled volley, and rely on the formidable destructive power of the 8.50 caliber machine guns to achieve the objective. The overarching aim was not to engage in extended, drawn-out combat. Rather, it was to inflict the maximum possible damage with overwhelming force in the shortest conceivable time frame, followed by an immediate disengagement before the enemy could mount any coherent counter-response. This strategic approach epitomized the application of industrial-era warfare principles to the aerial domain, a methodology characterized by its ruthless efficiency, brutal effectiveness, and undeniable success. The execution of a precise dive attack, a tactic both devastating and remarkably efficient, demanded a level of exactitude from pilots that transformed them into tactical strategists during the heat of battle. This formidable maneuver invariably commenced at a significant elevation, typically ranging between 28,000 and 32,000 feet above sea level. From this commanding vantage point, the aviators of the P-47 Thunderbolt meticulously scoured the vast expanse beneath for any indication of German aerial contingents. The successful identification of adversary formations was paramount to the entire operation. Pilots employed keen observation, searching either for the distinctive contrails, the ethereal white vapor trails exquisitely etched by aircraft engines in the frigid, rarefied upper atmosphere, or for the stark, shadowy outlines of German fighter planes silhouetted against the backdrop of clouds or the terrestrial landscape below. Upon successful detection, the intricate geometry of the assault was initiated. The P-47 pilot would strategically position his aircraft several thousand feet superior to the target formation, crucially ensuring he was also situated upsun. The strategic importance of the sun's placement cannot be overstated. A German pilot attempting to visually track an incoming plummeting thunderbolt would be instantly disoriented and temporarily incapacitated by the blinding glare if the American assailant launched his assault directly from the solar axis. This advantageous alignment was never a matter of mere chance. Rather, it was the culmination of several deliberate minutes of calculated aerial adjustments preceding the actual engagement. Furthermore, flight leaders maintained an unbroken stream of communication, diligently verifying that all 4 aircraft within their flight were impeccably arrayed and prepared before committing to the precipitous descent. The actual plunge commenced with a relatively shallow angle, perhaps a mere 30 degrees nose down, as the pilot simultaneously engaged the throttle to its fullest extent, unleashing the engine's complete power output. The P-47, renowned for its robustness, rapidly gained velocity, transforming airspeed into the singular most critical factor for the attacking aviator. Pilots intently observed their airspeed indicators, witnessing the needle ascend with breathtaking rapidity, 300 miles per hour, then 350, swiftly reaching 400. Upon nearing this formidable velocity, the pilot would then acutely sharpen his descent, increasing the dive angle to a more aggressive 45 or even 50 degrees. At these extreme velocities, the aircraft would inevitably vibrate and shudder, a sensation that would undoubtedly instill profound apprehension in pilots flying less robust, lighter fighter aircraft. The aerodynamic forces caused the control surfaces to become exceptionally rigid, demanding considerable physical strength and exertion to manipulate the control column. This inherent characteristic underscored the significant advantage conferred by the P-47's substantial mass and sturdy construction. Its considerable weight effectively absorbed and dampened out the violent turbulence encountered at such speeds, maintaining the aircraft's remarkable stability and composure even as its velocity relentlessly propelled it towards exhilarating speeds of 450 or 408 miles. We sincerely hope you are finding this detailed exploration of aerial combat tactics both informative and captivating. Please consider staying with us until the very end of this video for a complete understanding of these incredible maneuvers. We would be immensely grateful if you could show your support by giving us a like and subscribing to our channel for more in-depth content. Additionally, we encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments section below. Tell us where you are watching from and what your opinion is on this fascinating topic of historical aviation strategy. Mastery of gunsight discipline was the crucial differentiator between an assault that achieved its destructive objective and one that merely expended precious ammunition fruitlessly. Given the astounding velocities involved in these dives, the pilot's window of opportunity for effective engagement was remarkably brief, lasting perhaps a mere 2 or 3 fleeting seconds. The visual representation within the gunsight evolved with dizzying speed. An enemy aircraft would materialize, rapidly expand in size, and then, in an instant, streak past. Experienced aviators meticulously trained themselves to initiate their fusillade at an approximate distance of 400 yards, maintaining continuous pressure on the trigger as they rapidly converged to a range of 200 yards. The formidable armament of 8 50 caliber machine guns, symmetrically distributed with 4 housed within each wing, projected a devastating cone of fire. This lethal pattern was calibrated to converge at a specific point where the guns were harmonized, generally preset for 300 yards. Within this optimal range, even a brief concentrated burst of a single second would unleash a torrent of 40 to 50 rounds directly into the enemy's vulnerable area. These projectiles, specifically armor-piercing incendiary rounds, possessed the destructive capability to effortlessly rip through aircraft aluminum, ignite volatile fuel tanks, catastrophically shatter vital engines, or fatally incapacitate enemy aircrew. The absolute pivotal juncture of the entire engagement unfolded instantaneously, subsequent to the discharge of ordnance. Pilots of lesser experience or discipline might succumb to the temptation of attempting to visually track their target, lingering to ascertain the impact of their rounds. Such a tactical error, however, proved to be a fatal miscalculation for many. The established doctrine governing the dive attack unequivocally mandated an immediate, unwavering commitment to the through pass. Consequently, the pilot was compelled to maintain his aircraft's nose in its downward trajectory, preserving or even augmenting his prodigious speed, and to explosively burst entirely through the hostile formation, while German interceptors, positioned above and adjacent to the targeted aircraft, would invariably initiate desperate turns, striving to engage the assailant, the P-47, by virtue of its velocity, had already surged past them, plummeting away at speeds that their own aircraft simply could not equal. This uncompromising adherence to the through pass constituted the inherent brilliance of the maneuver. The attacking pilot found himself exposed to potential counterfire for an incredibly compressed duration, approximately 3 seconds, precisely the interval spanning from the moment he entered effective firing range until he had decisively pierced through the lower perimeter of the enemy's tightly packed formation. Having successfully cleared the hostile formation and descended beneath it, the pilot then initiated the crucial phase of recovery. Extricating an aircraft from a dive that had reached speeds of 450 mph demanded an exceptionally refined and meticulous technique. An overly aggressive or abrupt retraction of the control stick risked not only severely overstressing the airframe, potentially leading to structural failure, but also the perilous consequence of the pilot losing consciousness due to the immense G-forces exerted. The correct and judicious recovery procedure involved a smooth yet resolute rearward pull, allowing the aircraft's nose to ascend progressively. The P-47's legendary robust construction was engineered to withstand immense stresses, tolerating maneuvers that would undoubtedly have ripped the wings from less sturdily built, lighter aircraft. Nevertheless, even with such resilience, pilots invariably adhered to and respected the established operational limits. As the nose of the Thunderbolt arced upwards and pierced the horizon, the colossal kinetic energy accumulated during the rapid descent was efficiently transmuted into potential energy, manifesting as valuable altitude. The Thunderbolt would then execute a formidable zoom climb, frequently reclaiming an astonishing 5,000 or even 6,000 feet, purely from the sheer momentum generated by its preceding dive. This powerful zoom climb distinctly showcased the profound advantages of the P-47's engine performance at high altitudes. The formidable R-2800 engine, augmented by its advanced turbo supercharger system, continued to generate impressive power output, even as the aircraft ascended relentlessly back towards its initial operational ceiling of 30,000 feet. In stark contrast, German fighter pilots attempting to pursue would find their engines struggling, gasping for sufficient oxygen in the rarefied atmosphere, experiencing a significant loss of power that compelled them to either level their flight or descend. The P-47, however, maintained its relentless upward trajectory. And remarkably, within a matter of mere minutes, the pilot found himself restored to his optimal attack altitude, rejoining his flight and poised to orchestrate yet another devastating diving pass. This cycle of attack and ascent was then systematically repeated. While German aviators had previously encountered exceptionally proficient adversaries, exemplified by the courageous RAF Spitfire pilots defending Britain's skies, and the tenacious Soviet airmen engaged in the brutal battles above Stalingrad, the distinct methodology of the P-47 dive attacks introduced an entirely novel and profoundly unsettling challenge. Veterans of the Luftwaffe frequently characterized this particular tactic as nothing short of psychological warfare delivered at 450 meters per hour. The palpable fear instilled in the German pilots extended far beyond the immediate apprehension of being struck by enemy fire. It encompassed a pervasive and demoralizing sense of utter helplessness. When the powerful Thunderbolts plunged precipitously through their tightly knit formations, German pilots found themselves utterly incapable of mounting an effective counterattack. Their only viable recourse was to frantically disperse and desperately cling to the hope of individual survival. A poignant first-hand account comes from Oberleutnant Franz Stiegler, an experienced Bf-109 pilot serving with Jagdgeschwader 27, who meticulously documented an encounter in his mission diary from November 1943 involving the formidable 56th Fighter Group. His staffel, comprising 9 aircraft executing a disciplined, close-knit formation, was in the process of ascending to intercept a contingent of B-17 bombers when American fighters suddenly materialized high above them. Stiegler vividly recounted observing dark, ominous shapes detach with alarming speed from their high cover, followed by the truly terrifying acceleration as the P-47s hurtled downwards. His formation commander attempted to issue commands for evasive maneuvers, but the established radio discipline disintegrated instantaneously. Each individual pilot, driven by an overwhelming instinct for pure survival, broke away in a divergent direction, their primal self-preservation instincts completely overriding years of rigorous training. The Thunderbolts, with ruthless efficiency, tore through their formation in mere seconds, and Stiegler bore witness as two of his squadron mates plummeted from the sky, leaving ominous trails of smoke. Crucially, the American pilots did not linger to engage in prolonged dogfights. They were already rapidly ascending and climbing away, well out of reach, before the disoriented Germans could even begin to regroup. This devastating and demoralizing operational pattern became a persistent feature across virtually every significant aerial engagement from the latter half of 1943 and continued thereafter. Comprehensive tactical reports meticulously compiled by the Luftwaffe consistently highlight a recurring and troubling theme. The aggressive, high-altitude assaults launched by American fighters invariably triggered an instantaneous and catastrophic disintegration of German aerial formations. Squadron cohesion, the fundamental principle of coordinated action and mutual support, was universally acknowledged as the absolute cornerstone of effective air combat. Fighter aircraft operating within well-drilled, synchronized groups possessed the inherent capability to provide essential cover for one another, to focus their collective firepower with devastating effect, and to execute intricate, multifaceted tactical maneuvers with precision. However, the moment the P-47s descended with a terrifying shriek, achieving velocities that German aircraft were utterly incapable of matching, that vital cohesion simply vanished into thin air. Each individual pilot was abruptly thrust into a state of acute isolation, consumed by an intense preoccupation with his own immediate survival, and tragically rendered unable to place any trust in the continued presence or support of his wingman. The psychological repercussions of these novel tactics reverberated far beyond the initial moments of engagement. German aviators found themselves increasingly preoccupied with scanning the skies above them, diverting their attention from the primary objective of intercepting Allied bomber formations. This shift in focus forced squadron commanders to elevate their units to greater altitudes, a maneuver that consumed invaluable fuel resources in the desperate hope of securing a defensive advantage against the P-47's devastating diving assaults. However, ascending to these elevated positions introduced a new set of compromises. It curtailed the time available at optimal combat altitude, diminished the operational endurance over vital target zones, and caused their aircraft engines to labor inefficiently in the rarefied atmosphere. This thin air, conversely, played directly into the strengths of the P-47's advanced turbo-supercharger system, granting American fighters a distinct performance edge. Consequently, the Luftwaffe was confronted with an untenable dilemma: either maintain lower altitudes and remain acutely susceptible to sudden, steep attacks, or ascend higher, thereby significantly compromising their overall combat efficacy and mission objectives. Within the higher echelons of the Luftwaffe's command structure, there was a palpable struggle to formulate effective counter-tactics against this relentless new threat. Certain German units experimented with segmenting their formations into two distinct elements, one positioned at a higher altitude, tasked with engaging the American P-47s, and another situated lower, intended to intercept the bomber streams. This strategy of a divided force, however, rapidly demonstrated its futility. The American pilots, with their superior energy management, would simply target the lower German element, executing swift, devastating dives that dispersed the formation, and then rapidly ascend back to altitude before the higher German unit could effectively intercede or offer support. Other German squadrons attempted to mitigate the danger by compressing their formations, flying in tighter, more compact groupings, under the misguided assumption that this would make dive attacks more perilous for the American attackers. Instead, this tactic inadvertently rendered them even more susceptible to the P-47's formidable and concentrated firepower. The devastating 50 caliber machine guns, firing streams of heavy projectiles, were indifferent to the proximity of targets. Rather, closer formations simply translated into a greater probability of multiple hits within a single, lethal burst. Yet beyond these tactical failures, the most profound and debilitating psychological consequence was the sheer unpredictability of these aerial assaults. In traditional aerial combat, experienced pilots could often anticipate the maneuvers of their adversaries, allowing for a dynamic interplay of reactions and counter-reactions. However, the P-47's dive attacks defied any such discernible rhythm or pattern. German airmen found themselves in a perpetual state of uncertainty, never truly knowing the precise moment an attack would materialize, the vector from which it would descend, or indeed, the number of enemy aircraft that would be involved in the assault. On some occasions, a solitary Thunderbolt might execute a blistering dive through their formations, a fleeting but terrifying apparition. At other times, an entire squadron would descend in a relentless, sequential torrent, one aircraft after another, affording the German pilots no respite or opportunity to regroup and re-establish defensive integrity between successive strikes. This pervasive and relentless unpredictability fostered an environment of unremitting stress, gradually eroding the resilience and mental fortitude of even the most seasoned and battle-hardened aviators in the Luftwaffe. We encourage you to stay with us and witness the full conclusion of this compelling narrative. Your support, in the form of a like and subscription, would be immensely appreciated. We also invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below, letting us know where you are watching from and what your perspective is on the crucial topic discussed in this video. A stark testament to this tactical shift came from Major Hannes Trautloft, a distinguished Luftwaffe ace credited with an astonishing tally of over 200 aerial victories. In a candid interview with German military intelligence in January 1944, Trautloft conceded that the American dive tactics were, with their existing aircraft, almost insurmountable. He articulated the futility of attempting to climb and engage the P-47s after their attacks, recognizing that such an endeavor was largely pointless. Conversely, he pointed out that diving away from the threat meant abandoning the very bomber formations they were assigned to intercept and protect against. His ultimate conclusion was delivered with unsparing honesty. We must shoot them before they reach altitude, or accept that we cannot engage them on favorable terms. This frank admission, emanating from one of Germany's most celebrated and experienced fighter pilots, unequivocally laid bare the profound and irreversible alteration that had occurred in the fundamental equation of aerial combat. The quantifiable data presented an undeniable narrative, one that even the most ardent skeptics found impossible to disregard. Prior to the systematic implementation of Hub Zemke's innovative dive attack tactics in August 1943, the 56th Fighter Group's kill-to-loss ratio languished at approximately 1.2:1, indicating a precarious balance, where they were barely managing to hold their own in the brutal aerial engagements. However, a mere 4 months later, by December 1943, following the full adoption of the new operational doctrine, that critical ratio had dramatically surged to an impressive 4.7:1. This astonishing improvement signified that the 56th was now eliminating German fighter aircraft at nearly 5 times the rate at which they were sustaining their own losses. This remarkable shift was far from a mere incremental gain. It represented nothing less than a wholesale revolution and a complete transformation in their combat effectiveness and operational superiority. The dawn of January 1944 heralded an era of even more striking and dramatic outcomes. During the intense period known as Big Week, a coordinated series of extensive bomber raids launched in February, targeting critical German aircraft production facilities, the 56th Fighter Group achieved an extraordinary feat, claiming 82 confirmed aerial victories within a mere 7-day span, while suffering the loss of only 11 of their own aircraft. Major Gerald Johnson, a distinguished pilot within the group, personally accounted for 7 German fighters during this pivotal period. Each victory meticulously executed using the precise high-altitude dive attack methodology. His detailed combat reports consistently depicted each engagement with a stark, almost formulaic simplicity: climb high, spot enemy formation, dive through at maximum speed, zoom back to altitude, repeat. This approach consciously eschewed the protracted, swirling dogfights and intricate turning contests that had once defined aerial combat, replacing them with a relentless and brutally efficient cycle of attack and disengagement. A compelling comparison with other P-47 groups unequivocally underscored the profound value and efficacy of this newly adopted doctrine. The 78th Fighter Group, for instance, initially demonstrated resistance to embracing Zemke's innovative tactics, persisting in their traditional attempts at close-quarters dogfighting. As a consequence, in January 1944, they endured a crippling 23 aircraft losses, while managing to claim only 14 kills. Their kill-to-loss ratio was starkly inverted, indicating they were losing nearly 2 aircraft for every single German adversary they managed to shoot down, a wholly unsustainable attrition rate. However, a significant turning point arrived by March, after the commander of the 78th undertook a crucial visit to the 56th to personally observe and understand their successful methodologies. Upon implementing similar tactics within his own group, their combat ratio dramatically improved to an impressive 3.1:1. This remarkable turnaround highlighted that a mere shift in tactical doctrine, executed with the very same aircraft, had the power to more than triple their overall combat effectiveness. The individual statistics of pilots further corroborated and amplified this emerging pattern of success. Robert Johnson, operating within the 56th Fighter Group and strictly adhering to Zemke's doctrine, had amassed an astounding 27 confirmed aerial victories by May 1944, all without ever being shot down himself. His remarkable achievement was not attributable to some inherently superior flying skill, as numerous other pilots possessed comparable natural talent and dexterity in the cockpit. Instead, his decisive advantage lay in his unwavering and almost ruthless adherence to the core principles of the dive attack. Johnson's mission reports read with an almost mechanical consistency, detailing a precise methodology, always maintaining an altitude advantage throughout the entirety of an engagement, executing only high-speed diving passes, strictly avoiding the pursuit of targets into perilous, low-altitude turning fights, and invariably performing an immediate, rapid zoom climb back to altitude following each and every attack. He approached air combat not as an unpredictable dogfight, but rather as a highly repeatable and efficient industrial process. And the undeniable results served as their own powerful validation. Throughout the entirety of 1944, the headquarters of the 8th Air Force meticulously aggregated and analyzed combat data from across all its operational fighter groups. The findings consistently demonstrated that those groups which embraced and rigorously applied the high-altitude dive tactics exhibited sustained and significant improvements in their combat performance. For instance, the 4th Fighter Group, which operated P-47s from March through September 1944, meticulously documented an impressive 141 kills against a mere 23 losses, while employing these precise methods, yielding an outstanding kill-to-loss ratio of 6.1:1. Even more remarkably, the 300th Fighter Group, which was constituted later and received initial training in dive tactics from its very inception, achieved an even higher ratio of 7.2:1. These compelling figures were not the product of chance occurrences or isolated statistical anomalies. Rather, they provided irrefutable proof that the tactical doctrine was not merely effective, but spectacularly successful in its application. Crucially, German loss records offered corroborating evidence from the opposing perspective, painting an equally grim picture for the Luftwaffe. Reports from the Luftwaffe quartermaster compiled in mid-1944 starkly indicated that fighter losses over German territory had surged by an alarming 73% between January and June of that year. This dramatic increase occurred despite the fact that the overall numerical strength of German fighter aircraft had not diminished substantially during the same period. The implication was clear: the Germans were losing their precious aircraft at a rate significantly faster than their industrial capacity could possibly replace them. Furthermore, interrogation reports from captured Luftwaffe pilots consistently and repeatedly identified the relentless American dive attacks as a paramount and devastating factor contributing to their escalating attrition. A particularly telling detail emerged from an interrogation report concerning a German pilot who was shot down in April 1944. He recounted that his entire operational group had been effectively rendered combat ineffective after suffering the catastrophic loss of 12 aircraft within a mere 3-day period, all attributed to the relentless and devastating diving attacks executed by P-47s. This individual account vividly illustrates the profound and immediate impact of the new tactics on German unit cohesion and operational capability. The triumph of this tactical revolution transcended the mere enhancement of kill ratios. Its positive ramifications extended significantly to the overall strategic objectives. A critical outcome was the marked decrease in bomber losses, a trend that became evident once the P-47 groups had fully mastered and consistently applied the dive attack methodology. In the nascent stages of 1943, the 8th Air Force frequently endured an unsustainable attrition rate of 5 to 7% of its bomber formations per mission. Such grievous losses posed a severe threat to the viability of the entire daylight bombing campaign, almost bringing it to a premature halt. However, by the summer of 1944, armed with effective fighter escorts employing these properly refined tactics, the rate of bomber losses plummeted dramatically to a much more acceptable range of 1 to 2% per mission, thereby securing the strategic bombing effort. Their operational losses plummeted, ultimately reaching a mere 1 to 2% per mission. The P-47 groups were no longer merely striving for survival. they were decisively fulfilling their paramount objective of providing robust protection for the bomber formations. German interceptor aircraft, disoriented and scattered by the relentless, high-speed diving assaults, found themselves utterly incapable of executing coordinated attacks against the Allied bombers. This fundamental shift meant that the numerical advantage in air combat, once skewed against the Allied forces, had decisively reversed. Germany's formidable Luftwaffe was now hemorrhaging both its precious aircraft and its irreplaceable cadre of seasoned pilots at a pace that threatened to utterly dismantle its defensive capabilities well before the close of 1944. This profound shift in combat efficacy did not originate from the sterile pronouncements of high command directives or the meticulously revised pages of official training manuals. Instead, this tactical revolution organically propagated through the unfiltered, candid discussions held in officers' clubs after grueling missions, in casual exchanges between sorties, and most profoundly in the stark, often brutal, post-combat debriefings where the few who survived articulated with chilling clarity precisely what strategies yielded success in the unforgiving skies. By January 1944, intelligence regarding the 56th Fighter Group's remarkable achievements had permeated every P-47 unit within the 8th Air Force. While some commanding officers swiftly embraced these innovative methodologies, others initially resisted, clinging to established, albeit less effective, practices until their escalating loss rates compelled them to adopt change. Colonel Don Blakesley, a distinguished leader of the 4th Fighter Group, personally journeyed to Zemke's operations room in February 1944. Blakesley, a seasoned veteran who had flown with the Royal Air Force prior to America's entry into the conflict, held deeply ingrained convictions regarding aerial combat. He dedicated 2 intensive days to observing the 56th's meticulous mission planning, absorbing their detailed briefings, and scrutinizing their engagement protocols. What ultimately swayed his perspective was not abstract theory, but the irrefutable evidence displayed on the mission board, showcasing 56th pilots credited with 10, 15, or even 20 aerial victories, and crucially, still alive. Conversely, the fate of pilots adhering to older, less effective tactics was overwhelmingly grim. Convinced by this stark reality, Blakesley promptly returned to his unit and implemented the dive attack doctrine within a single week. We ask you to stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The 352nd Fighter Group, which had been activated in July 1943, enjoyed the distinct advantage of internalizing these advanced tactics before the opportunity arose to develop entrenched, less effective habits. Their commanding officer, Colonel Joe Mason, maintained regular correspondence with Zemke and seamlessly integrated the principles of the dive attack into the group's foundational training regimen. Consequently, new pilots arriving in England were immediately indoctrinated with fundamental tenets. Altitude is life, speed is weapon, never turn with the enemy. The 352nd's inaugural combat mission in September 1943 employed a pure dive attack methodology, resulting in an impressive 5.1 kill ratio during their very first month of active engagement. This early success conclusively demonstrated the doctrine's efficacy even when executed by relatively inexperienced pilots, provided they rigorously adhered to its core principles. These groundbreaking tactics were not static, but continually refined through the crucible of practical combat experience. Pilots progressively discovered that executing dives through enemy formations yielded even more devastating results when multiple flights coordinated their assaults with precision. The 56th Fighter Group, renowned for its innovation, developed a sophisticated ladder technique where 4-ship flights would strategically position themselves at staggered altitudes, one element at 32,000 feet, another at 30,000 feet, and a third at 28,000 feet. They would then initiate their dives in a carefully timed sequence, approximately 15 seconds apart, denying German pilots any opportunity to reorganize or recover between successive attacks. The initial flight would effectively disrupt and scatter the enemy formation. The second flight would then intercept German aircraft attempting to regroup, and the third would decisively engage the remaining survivors. This relentless rolling attack strategy could sustain intense pressure for several minutes, utterly disintegrating the enemy unit's cohesion and fighting capability. In this dynamic combat environment, stringent radio discipline became absolutely paramount. Initial dive attacks were often hampered by communication breakdowns, as pilots frequently flooded the radio frequencies with panicked shouts of "break right" or "bogey at 6,000 hours," creating an overwhelming cacophony of useless chatter. In response, Zemke instituted incredibly strict protocols. Only flight leaders were authorized to call the initial dive. Following this command, radio silence was rigidly enforced, with exceptions made solely for reporting critical threats or confirming kills. Pilots were expected to implicitly trust their wingmen to execute the attack flawlessly, without the need for constant verbal communication. This disciplined approach significantly enhanced overall situational awareness, as pilots could genuinely discern and react to vital calls rather than attempting to filter them through an incessant barrage of noise. The tactical doctrine demonstrated its inherent adaptability as the aerial conflict continued to evolve. By the spring of 1944, the Luftwaffe had begun to consciously avoid direct engagements with the high-flying P-47 formations, instead electing to concentrate their attacks on the vulnerable bomber streams, when American fighters were either low on fuel or caught out of position. In response to this shifting German strategy, P-47 groups ingeniously adjusted their formations by splitting their forces. One section would maintain a high-altitude patrol, actively searching for German interceptors, while a second section flew in closer proximity to the bombers, providing immediate, dedicated escort. Should German aircraft initiate an attack on the bombers, the high-flying section would swiftly dive to engage them. This remarkable flexibility underscored the doctrine's maturity. It was not a rigid, unyielding procedure, but rather a set of adaptable fundamental principles. The process of training new replacement pilots became thoroughly systematized by mid-1944. Fresh pilots arriving from the United States immediately received comprehensive indoctrination in the intricacies of dive attack tactics. Experienced veteran pilots would accompany them on practice missions, meticulously demonstrating the correct diving techniques, powerful zoom climbs, and essential formation discipline. These newcomers would then fly their initial combat missions as wingmen to the seasoned veterans, learning by direct observation and experience before attempting their own attacks. This invaluable mentorship approach dramatically reduced the loss rates among new pilots. Specifically, the 56th Fighter Group witnessed its replacement pilot loss rate plummet from a concerning 40% in early 1943 to an astonishing 112% by late 1944. Other types of aircraft subsequently adopted modified versions of these highly effective tactics. P-51 Mustangs, which began arriving in substantial numbers by the spring of 1944, employed similar dive attack principles, though their execution differed due to their lighter airframe and superior turning capabilities. P-38 Lightnings operating with the 15th Air Force over Italy also implemented dive tactics that skillfully exploited their inherent twin-engine power advantages. The fundamental core principle, to leverage an aircraft's strengths, mitigate its weaknesses, and dictate the terms of engagement through superior altitude and speed, proved to be universally applicable across all fighter types. The P-47's pioneering dive attack doctrine did not merely conclude with the cessation of hostilities in World War II. Instead, it fundamentally reshaped the way air forces conceptualized fighter employment, particularly emphasizing the critical relationship between an aircraft's inherent characteristics and its corresponding tactical doctrine. The profound lesson derived from this experience was unequivocally clear. Designing aircraft and developing tactics as isolated, separate processes invariably led to disastrous outcomes, as vividly exemplified by the early P-47 experience. True success necessitated a harmonious alignment of tactical employment with an aircraft's physical capabilities, even if that meant a radical departure from traditional, long-established combat methodologies. Years later, during the Korean War, fighter pilots flying F-86 Sabres against the formidable MiG-15s independently rediscovered energy tactics before fully realizing they were essentially applying the very same P-47 principles. The Sabre, though heavier than the MiG and less agile in low-speed turns, unequivocally dominated in high-speed dives and rapid zoom climbs. American pilots who mistakenly attempted to engage MiGs in traditional turn fighting often suffered the identical grim fate as early P-47 pilots who had tried to dogfight with FW-190s. Those who delved into the meticulously documented World War II after-action reports quickly recognized the recurring pattern. They learned to climb to superior altitude, execute swift, decisive dives, deliver slashing attacks, and then rapidly zoom away to regain their energy advantage. This astute understanding of energy management propelled the F-86's kill ratio against the MiG-15s to an extraordinary 10,1. Not because it was inherently a superior aircraft in every conceivable aspect, but because American pilots mastered energy management, while many Soviet and Chinese pilots continued to rely on less effective turn-fighting tactics. The concept of lied-on-turn fighting highlights a critical historical misapprehension in aerial combat. Colonel John Boyd, a pivotal figure in the 1960s, profoundly transformed fighter tactics by systematizing these crucial principles into his energy maneuverability theory. Boyd's extensive work, particularly at the Fighter Weapons School, involved devising intricate mathematical models designed for meticulously comparing aircraft performance across a multitude of diverse flight regimes. His celebrated OODA loop concept, observe, orient, decide, act, eloquently articulated how fighter pilots could achieve supremacy by expertly controlling the tempo of an engagement, rather than solely relying on raw aircraft agility. Boyd's exhaustive study of World War II combat frequently featured the missions of Hub Zemke's 56th Fighter Group in his comprehensive case studies. The remarkable metamorphosis of the P-47 Thunderbolt, evolving from an initial operational liability into a dominant aerial combatant, perfectly illustrated Boyd's central thesis that tactical flexibility and adaptability held far greater significance than mere platform specifications or inherent design characteristics. The F-4 Phantom, deployed during the Vietnam War, initially grappled with a striking doctrinal mismatch reminiscent of the challenges that had afflicted early P-47 operations decades prior. Although its designers had conceived the Phantom primarily as a missile-armed interceptor, combat encounters over North Vietnam frequently deteriorated into close-range dogfights. In these tight visual range engagements, the F-4's considerable size and substantial weight severely impeded its agility and maneuverability. Consequently, the early loss rates for the F-4 were alarmingly high and utterly unacceptable. A pivotal turning point arrived when the Navy Fighter Weapons School, famously known as Top Gun, began instructing pilots in advanced energy tactics. These strategies stemmed directly from lessons learned in World War II and the Korean War. Phantom crews were meticulously trained to exploit their aircraft's inherent thrust advantage and superior dive performance, rather than attempting to engage in turning contests with the lighter, more agile MiG-17s and MiG-21s. Following this shift in doctrine and training, the kill ratios improved significantly. This demonstrated that the very same aircraft, when flown with a fundamentally different tactical approach, could become exceptionally effective. Modern air combat in the current missile age might appear vastly different from the machine gun duels of 1943. Yet the fundamental physical laws underpinning aerial engagements endure unchanged. A contemporary fighter, such as an F-15 or F-35, still constantly transforms potential energy, altitude into kinetic energy. Speed still judiciously uses its energy state to prescribe the conditions of engagement, and still leverages rapid ascents, zoom climbs, to strategically reset tactical situations. While the primary weapons have evolved from simple bullets to sophisticated radar-guided missiles, the masterful management of an aircraft's energy state remains the decisive factor in determining who controls the fight. Every fighter pilot today is rigorously trained in basic fighter maneuvers that trace their lineage directly back to the P-47 dive tactics, the high yo-yo, the low yo-yo, and the vertical scissors. All are classic applications of energy management principles that Ziemke's pioneering pilots forged through iterative experimentation and hard-won experience. We sincerely invite you to stay with us and watch the remainder of this insightful video. We would be immensely grateful for your like and subscription. Please also consider leaving a comment below, letting us know where you are from, and sharing your thoughts on this compelling topic. The saga of the P-47 imparts profound insights into the broader theme of military adaptation. Organizations, by their very nature, inherently tend to oppose radical changes to methods that have previously proven successful, even when evolving circumstances clearly necessitate such shifts. The Army Air Force's pre-war tactical doctrine, for instance, had demonstrated efficacy in various training exercises and smaller-scale conflicts, leading commanders to presume its direct applicability to the European theater. However, early combat operations quickly revealed its inadequacy. Despite this undeniable evidence, institutional inertia meant that many units persisted in deploying failed approaches for many months, often at great cost. Ultimately, significant change originated with mid-level commanders such as Ziemke, who possessed both the latitude to innovate and the fortitude to abandon doctrine that was demonstrably resulting in dire casualties for their personnel. This dynamic recurs consistently throughout military history, Pioneering tactical advancements frequently emerge from those individuals positioned close enough to the combat to discern what truly works, yet possessing sufficient rank and influence to effect a transformation across their units. The human element held equal significance to the underlying physics in these critical transformations. Zemke's pilots repose confidence in his discernment because he meticulously prioritized their preservation, rather than being swayed by untested academic constructs. He strategically altered tactics with the explicit aim of keeping his men alive, not merely to conform to institutional directives or headquarters expectations. This profound level of trust facilitated the swift adoption of what might have initially seemed like unconventional approaches, instructing seasoned fighter pilots not to engage in traditional dogfights necessitated a foundation of trustworthiness, earned through Zemke's consistently evidenced dedication to their survival. Clearly, the character of command proved pivotal. The enduring legacy of the P-47 Thunderbolt lives on as a cornerstone within every modern fighter doctrine that accords primacy to the judicious handling of energetic states. It resonates in every tactical manual that advocates leveraging inherent platform advantages rather than attempting to fight an opponent's preferred engagements. And it persists in the bedrock comprehension that triumph is forged through conforming operational methodologies to physical realities, rather than endeavoring to compel natural laws to align with preconceived strategies.